Got your attention? We're ready to roll. Rotarians and guests, welcome to the June 2nd meeting of the Rotary Club of York. Our members are dedicated to service above self and Rotary's four-way test. In the midst of our country's celebration of Memorial Day, we honor and remember our fellow Rotarian who passed in this last year. The member who is gone but not forgotten that we remember today is Henry Kirkpatrick Jr. Henry was a Rotary Club of York member for 57 years when he passed on Christmas Day of last year. Henry served as a rifleman in the 84th Infantry Division during World War II, and on Christmas Day, ironically, 1944, was evacuated from the front lines of the Battle of the Bulge with injuries incurred on a scouting mission. Rest in peace, Henry. And Henry was one of our friends that always indulged in 2 desserts. We have had some given up at our table. Henry would have taken them. Frank and I are left to fight over them. He was a sweet man with a sweet tooth. So leading our opening song and pledge today is past President Brian Tate, and delivering our invocation is Michael Reichman. Brian.
President, can you remind me which song I'm doing today?
Oh. I don't know, I deleted it. You know, dealer's choice, right?
God bless America. And are we all able to sing today? So if you would like to hum along with me, I'm not sure if we are allowed to in a space, if everybody's able to join in, but if you'd like to sing to yourself or hum along, please join me with God Bless America. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, past President Brian. This is my first meeting back here since the pandemic. It's strange how much feels familiar, yet how so much has happened since then. It's eerie. And one of the last meetings I attended was with when Wilmington Trust comes, you know, in the winter time, and they talk about the stock market and everything. And I remember raising my hand and asking them what they think was going to happen. And little did we know. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a word of prayer. Last Monday was Memorial Day, and though it is often a holiday associated with celebration, fireworks, friends, and barbecue, it's important to remember it's a solemn holiday for remembrance for fallen soldiers. Soldiers who sacrificed their lives and futures for a belief and an idea. Many of these troops died in what some would call just wars, World War I, World War II, and others might call unjust, Vietnam and Iraq. But it is important to remember the bloodiest and gruesome battle to ever have affected U.S. citizens, and that's the Civil War. Though it happened over 150 years ago, it killed the most people, destroyed the most property, and left cultural wounds and divides that still exist to this very day. Even if you're a war hawk or a pacifist, we can all agree that remembering about these fallen soldiers and remembering why they died is an essential part of learning and history so that we are not doomed to repeat it. Bless our speakers who will help us with that learning and remembrance, and let us say amen.
Thank you, Brian and Michael, for that warm welcome on this warm summer day. I'd also like to thank President-elect Jackie Summers for pinch hitting with last week's meeting. It looked like you had a great time at the Revs, and thanks to Eric for hosting us. That's just a foretaste of the feast to come of her leadership. So we have several announcements. Our committees fuel the impact of our club to create positive change, both locally here in York County and throughout the world. The theme for today, for our Rotary year, is Rotary opens opportunities. So oh my goodness, an opportunity is in front of you, and that is to extend your reach and affirm your commitment as true Rotarians. There are many ways to do that, and this is one of those. True Rotarians are dedicated to service above self, and committee service is one of the many ways to proudly fly your Rotary flag and your service above self motto. Be on the lookout for an email asking you to complete a form indicating your committee service interest for the Rotary year. Please consider where you would like to focus your energy, expertise, and talents by serving on one of our many committees beginning July 1. Please complete and return the form to the office by June 15th. This is a great way to support the leadership of President-elect Jackie and our board and our club as we advance our strategic plan. And thank you to all of our returning committee members for your past and future service. Now, speaking of committees, the following committees are holding upcoming meetings. The program committee will meet after today's meeting in the Elmer Smith room here. The following committees are meeting via Zoom. Membership today at 1:30, fundraising committee Friday the 4th at 7:30 a.m., and our IDEA committee Monday at 8 a.m. On behalf of our club, I'd like to wish happy anniversary to our members celebrating milestone years of membership in the Rotary Club of York. Jack Rhodes, his 35th anniversary, past District Governor Dick Brown on his 45th, Bob Pullo on Bob's 45th, and Fred Middick. Fred is with us here today, right? Fred? Well, oh, there you are. Sorry. Fred, our longest serving member, 62 years. That's decades of service above self. So your faithfulness, loyalty, and your seniority are all impressive. Congratulations. Bravo, Jack, Dick, Bob, and Fred. That's awesome. Now for a Rotary Foundation update, Bill Hartman.
Thank you, President Ann, and good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. In my past discussions with you about the Rotary Foundation, I've tried to make 3 points. The first one is that 50% of your contribution goes to doing a lot of good in the world globally, based on the focus areas of the Rotary Foundation. Number two, 50% of your contribution does come back to our district and is used to do lots of good in central Pennsylvania and in York County. And a couple examples of how we've used these funds are the Trees for the Trail and the Kiwanis Lake projects. The third point is, and Ann mentioned in her talk about true Rotarians being in committees and active as opposed to just coming for lunch. World-class Rotary clubs have also made giving to the Rotary Foundation a part of being a true outstanding Rotarian. So I thought you might like to know how we're doing with our Rotary Foundation. Well, first of all, we have 175 Paul Harris Fellows. That's great. Thank you, Ann. A Paul Harris Fellow, as you know, is someone who has contributed a cumulative amount of at least $1,000 during their time as a Rotarian. Second of all, and this is equally impressive, we have 254 Rotarians who give to the foundation. You should lead us in applause, man. Thank you. Okay. Now that's not 100%, but it's close and it's moving in the right direction. And then lastly, in terms of how we're doing, I think this is an interesting number. Over the lifetime of our club, our members have given in excess of $1.8 million to the Rotary Foundation. Isn't that super? So I think we can be really proud of what we're doing. And today I want to talk about a subject I haven't talked about. It's something that I think you all are aware of, but yet a lot of Rotarians don't know exactly how it works. I want to talk about the benefit of donor recognition points and the donor recognition points that you receive for giving to the foundation and how those points can be used. So first of all, for every dollar that you give to the Rotary Foundation, you receive 1 recognition point. And these recognition points can be used in a variety of ways. First of all, they can be given to another individual to help them achieve Paul Harris status or to help them achieve multiple Paul Harris status. The points can be donated to any individual, Rotarian or non-Rotarian, and can be used to recognize the recipient for any reason that a donor chooses. The other nice thing about them is that they never expire. So as you accumulate these donor recognition points, they continue to accumulate as you continue to give to the foundation. So Ann talked about opportunity, and I'm going to present you with a special, unique opportunity today. Between now and June 15th, our district will match the donor recognition points that you receive for contributing to the foundation. In other words, instead of receiving 1 recognition point for every dollar that you contribute to the foundation, for contributions you make between now and June 15, you will receive 2 recognition points. So this is a unique opportunity to accelerate your accumulation of points, and I certainly hope that as many of our members as possible can take advantage of it. Now, Lynn has said that the best way to do this is to write a check payable to the Rotary Foundation and send it to her, but if you would prefer to have it be put on your bill, just contact her and let it know. Either way, it's an outstanding opportunity to accumulate points, and please keep up the great work you're all doing in contributing to such an important foundation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bill. 1.8 million, that is tremendous. We should all be very proud of the legacy that our members over the years have created for the foundation. And Bill, thanks for your leadership of our foundation committee. Very, very important. I don't know if you've heard in the news lately that universities and colleges have changed the names of students. They're no longer using freshmen, upperclassmen. So I'm just wondering, would Rotary International consider a change to Paul Harris Fellow? I don't know what that would be, but if somebody has an idea, I'm sure our idea committee would be happy to advance that to Rotary International. Today's business spotlight is shining on our very own Children's Aid Society. In 1913, a group of compassionate and dedicated individuals made the conscientious decision to do something to help orphan, neglected, and indigent children and to empower them to improve their life situations. As a result, the Children's Aid Society, a charitable organization of the Southern District of the Pennsylvania Church of the Brethren, was founded. And over 100 years later, their compassionate, dedicated professionals, volunteers, churches, businesses, and community organizations continue strong collaboration to create impact for children in our community. Their vision that all children are safe and loved by helping them and their families build stronger, healthier lives is supported through professional and compassionate services, including child-centered creative arts and psychotherapy, the Incredible Years parent education and Dinah school programs, weekly parent and caregiver support groups in the community, county prison, and with pregnant teens in 2 area high schools, a 24/7 caregiver toll-free hotline and referral service, family advocacy, a children's clothing room called God's Closet, 24/7 respite nursery care, and York Cares, a day shelter and Code Blue emergency shelter for those in need. The Children's Aid Society is unique in their commitment to help all children and families, regardless of their economic or social circumstances. Many programs and services are free or offered on a sliding scale based on family situation. Most services are offered now in hybrid formats, just like our club meeting, virtually via telehealth, HIPAA compliant Zoom platform, via telephone and in person at their 3 centers. Throughout the pandemic, all programs follow CDC and PA State Health Department safety standards. Thanks to Rotarian Eric Chase for providing this insight into your great work. Eric has been a member of our club since 2016. And now we welcome back. Is Al joining you, or did we take care of that? All right, congrats, Diane. Diane Marino for Merit Scholarship updates.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I get started introducing some of our past scholarship winners and the update they are going to give us, I'm happy to announce that Elle Sykes will not be on the podium today. However, I want to thank everyone who has reached out to me on the non-traditional scholarship information. Happy to say we did receive a couple more, and because of that, you are now getting the best. Jody Keller will come up and give a joke. I take no responsibility for this joke. I'm telling you that right now.
For those of you who weren't around at the time, oh, are you in for a treat? And Patty, I'm looking at you, buddy, because I don't want you to take this personally. All right, we ready? A priest, a minister, and a rabbi want to see who's best at his job. So they each go into the woods, find a bear, and attempt to convert it. The priest begins, "When I found the bear, I read to him from the catechism and sprinkled him with holy water. Next week is his first communion." "I found a bear by the stream," says the minister, "and preached God's holy word. The bear was so mesmerized that he let me baptize him." They both look down at the rabbi, who is lying on a gurney in a body cast. Looking back, he says, "Maybe I shouldn't have started with the circumcision."
Okay, thank you, Jody. Okay, now to carry on with what I came up here to do. These 2 young ladies off to my right are past recipients of the Bush Scholarship, which is $1,000 per year for 4 years. And I have to tell you, from sitting at this table, one of the most accomplished families I think I've ever had the pleasure of meeting, but also a little intimidating because of their accomplishments. Not only have these 2 sisters been awarded the Bush Scholarship, but in 2016, they also had a son, Alexander, who received our Chronic Scholarship. He is now working on his master's at the University of Chicago. So with this, I am going to start with Daniela. If you would like to come up, Daniela. Daniela has just finished her freshman year at Columbia. And she is studying, I got to read this because it's intimidating, environmental biology. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay, fantastic. So she's going to give us an update on her first year, and then I will introduce her sister.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Daniela. I just finished my first year, and it was quite an interesting year for my first year of college, but it was all online, and so I could take all of my classes from the comfort of my own home. And probably the most interesting class that I took this year was a class called Frontiers of Science, which actually changes its curriculum every year so that it matches the current events of the science world. And so this year, some of the topics we covered included COVID-19 as well as global warming, and it was a very interesting class. So this summer, I'll be working as an intern at a company called Mandolin, which is a music live streaming service provided for musicians so that they can perform live concerts in an online era. This summer, I'll be able to practice some of my programming and statistical skills that I'll need for my future career. And then this upcoming year, I'm very excited because I'll be on campus for the first time in New York City. And I'm really looking forward to seeing all of my classmates and professors in person for the first time as well. So I'm very grateful for all of the support that you have given me. And thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you, Daniela. And her sister, Catalina, will be joining us now. She's a 2018 graduate of Central High School, and she is a double major, one in neuroscience, the other in English literature, and she is also getting a minor in linguistics. She's currently, thank you, going to the University of Pittsburgh. So here is Catalina.
Hi, everyone. As Diane just said, my name is Catalina Feistritzer, and I'm very thankful to have been the 2018 recipient of the Bush Scholarship. This is my fourth and final installment of the scholarship, and in honor of that, I just wanted to take a second and reflect on my favorite memories through the Honors College at Pitt. My first is this class I took my freshman year. The Honors College offers incredibly unique experiences, and I was able to take a class in a maximum security prison. We served as classmates we created a classroom environment for maximum security prisoners in pursuit of higher education. And so I was able to take one of my literature classes alongside them, actually within the prison walls. So that was an incredible experience, one of my favorite at Pitt. And another experience I have this coming fall with one of my favorite professors in the English department combines my interests of literature and medicine. I'll be taking a class that, from the literature perspective, studies the human body in historical texts, but we do this alongside anatomical cadaver labs. So I'm very excited for this experience, and especially to begin combining my interests in English and medicine, which until this point have been pretty separate. My utmost favorite experience at Pitt is the research lab that I work in. I work in a neuropsychiatric lab where I work closely with a postdoctoral fellow. We are studying the neural circuitry underlying addiction and schizophrenia. And fingers crossed, we're hoping to be published in Nature within the end of the year. So looking forward to that, lots of work to do in writing. This summer, I will be performing neuroscience research in a different area of research. It's the neuroscience underlying robotic prosthesis. So, you know, if you've ever seen the monkeys with the robotic arms that they manipulate, we'll be working on the neural circuitry in that. I'll be at the University of Rochester through an NIH-funded program. And to conclude my senior year, I will be graduating with a Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience and a Bachelor of Arts in my English literature with minors in chemistry and linguistics. So I'm very, very grateful for all the support and generosity that you've shown me these 4 years, and I could not have done it without you. I'm very excited to see what the future holds, and within a year, I'll be applying to medical school. So thank you so much again for all your generosity.
So thank you, everyone. And I also want to thank you for supporting the Student Ed Committee. As you can see, the committee works very hard to make sure that this money goes to the right students. And proof right here is our future is looking grand. Have a great day.
Thank you, Diane, and to all the members of the Student Education Committee for the hours and time that you put in to evaluate and support these students. And Daniela and Catalina, congratulations, not only on surviving your freshman and junior years, but obviously thriving in a very challenging year. Your futures are bright, and you should be very proud. I'm sure your parents are of what you've accomplished, as well as your brother. So we welcome you to come back and join us at any time. We wish you the very best. Sounds like you have challenging and rewarding careers ahead of you, and we'd love nothing better to have York be part of your future. So congratulations to you. And now we have a little bit of fun in regard to the season that is upon us for our poll. Ben, I'll toss it to you.
Hey, everybody. It's going to be hard to top this, but here we go. Here's the poll for this week. It's about the temperatures getting hotter and what you're doing to stay cool. So for those joining online, you should be able to see that pop up on your screen right now. So the question is, as the temperature rises, how do you like to cool down? There's different options there. One of them is a refreshing umbrella drink, a tall, cold one, a dip in the pool, an ice cream cone from Perrydale. Can you say coffee by the sea or handles? So those answers are coming in right now. Feel free to shout out your answers here in the room. How do you guys like to stay cool? Perrydale. We hear a Perrydale. Anybody else?
Do we have any Carmen's fans in the room?
There's also, I don't know if anybody knows
Adam,
the
you
Collinsville
sell that
Drive-In
down
in
there at
Brogue.
Sawville's, right? Yeah.
Anybody know the Collinsville Drive-In in Brogue? No Southern Yorkers? Wow. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll give it a few more seconds here. We got about 48 participants online right now. About 30 of you have voted so far, so that's about 70% of you. We'll give it about 5 more seconds here. We do have some favorites in the mix. Joanne says, I know the Collinsville Drive-In in the chat. That's great. All right, we're going to share the poll right now, and I'll share these results, and we'll try to put them up on the screen here. All right, so it looks like most of you have said it's a tie, actually, between a dip in the pool. I know it's hard to see that, so I'm just going to take it back down. But a dip in the pool is tied with an ice cream cone from Perrydale, so a lot of Perrydale fans or handles. 33%. Oh, I'm wrong. A tall, cold one is the heavy favorite. By one vote, a tall, cold one wins it.
Iced tea, of course.
Yeah. And 6% of you have said a refreshing umbrella drink. So a tall, cold one is a lot more popular than a refreshing umbrella drink, apparently. And we'll toss it back to you. Thanks for joining, guys.
The pool was good, but the pond would be even better for you, Ben. Okay, so next I'm pleased to welcome to the podium club member Fred Rosenmiller. We asked Fred to introduce today's program due to his longtime love of history, especially that of ours here in York County. He's been a collector of York County artifacts and has either authored, edited, or published 3 books on the history of York County. Transportation, bottles and jugs, and I think some of those bottles and jugs included spirits that would have been good in the tall drinks, and the products that filled these containers. Fred.
I thought I'd use the support there just in case, but appreciate President Ann and her introduction. The work that I have done with cars and, as you mentioned, bottles and jugs and writing, pale in comparison to the distinguished gentleman that I'm going to be introducing. Now I find my notes here and we'll get going. I'd like to start with Scott Magus, who is a retired scientist and business executive. He has written some 23 books about the Civil War and the Underground Railroad, winning many awards. He has appeared on several TV networks. Scott and his wife, Debbie, have lived in York for over a decade. Having lived in Ohio, where his maternal great-great-grandfather was a 15-year-old drummer and rifleman, or rifle boy, as the case might be. And they served in the 51st Ohio Infantry, and his paternal great-great-grandfather marched with Sherman in the 183rd Ohio Infantry, and is a very impressive, as you can tell, Civil War historian. I have had the pleasure now of introducing Jim McClure. I had served with Jim on the board of directors of the York County History Center and got to know him quite well as being a consummate historian in York County. He has also written books. In the case of Scott, he wrote 23 books. In the case of Jim, 8 books. In the case of myself, a measly 3 books. And his books also dealt with York County history. He still writes a regular entries on his York County history blog called the Yorktown Square. I now turn over this podium to Scott and Jim, and you'll be in for a very interesting and informative presentation. Scott and Jim.
It's really great to be here today. This is, last I checked, which was this morning, we're addressing the 24th largest Rotary Club in the world, unless it's already changed since I checked, which it might have. And this is a prestigious opportunity to talk about the Civil War. We're taking a big swing today. We're going kind of at the most controversial part of the Civil War as it relates to York County, but we're also going to be talking about redemption for York County here today. So a little bit about the sin, a little bit about the redemption. How do you like that, Patty? Does that work okay? Okay. So, you know, it is a pleasure. It's great to be here. You know, in June 3rd, 1863, this was 138 years, 168 years, 158 years tomorrow. So thank you. You know, Robert E. Lee's troops slipped out of Fredericksburg, Virginia, and they slipped up the Shenandoah Valley, came to the Shenandoah Valley, and they ended up in York County on June 27th. So they walked from Frederick, Virginia to York County, and it just came right over the border. Now those that were in York County were about 11,000 troops. And that's about 1 out of 7 of all the troops that fought at Gettysburg for the Confederates were in York County. That's a number often overlooked. And they went right inside the border on a Saturday night, the 27th, and they were in Jackson Township. It's right in the border of Paradise, right past the York Airport, a little town called Farmers. And a delegation from York went out and visited the general who was there, Brigadier General John B. Gordon, visited him and said, hey, we'll give you the keys to the city, we'll surrender if you'll agree to not to tear up our town, not to damage our town. So they said, okay, that sounds good. So they came in the next morning when everybody's going to church and marched in, and they then they started extorting money from York, $100,000 in cash. Of course, we in York don't like to spend money, so we only gave them 28.6 or something like that. There was an awful lot of, but we gave him all the supplies he needed, and so you know, so there was a surrender. And the thing that made this surrender a little different maybe than other surrenders is that we went out and met them. It wasn't like we stayed in town and surrendered. We went out and met them. And so soon after that occurred, it was a major embarrassment. And, you know, for this reason, and we can talk about this later and talk about this in the question and answer, it kind of subsumed the Civil War in York County, discussion of the Civil War in York County for most of the 20th century. And there's another reason for that. We had a great American Revolution history here. The Articles of Confederation were adopted here. I mean, it's a big deal. Our first Constitution, United States, was adopted here in York County. And our World War II history is great. I mean, we really did help win World War II. Our factories produced so much stuff that really did help win World War II. So some of these Civil War accomplishments were subsumed. So we're going to spend the next 10 minutes Scott's going to tick through the list of those accomplishments, and we'll see how many of these things are new to you. So Scott?
Okay, first thing I want to talk about is a subject near and dear to my heart because it sets up the Civil War. And that's the fact that York County was deeply, and I mean deeply, involved in the earliest days of the Underground Railroad. As we know, the subject of the Underground Railroad and the American Civil War cannot be separated. And York County, for several reasons, was the key to both the Civil War and the Underground Railroad. One of which key fact is the fact that we are so close to some of the largest populations of enslaved people in the entire Atlantic seaboard. And so it was only natural for enslaved individuals to leave places like Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, Hartford County, et cetera, start moving northward. And as you can see in this map, it's probably fairly hard to see in the room, but there are a number of different major Underground Railroad routes throughout the United States. But York County played a key role. And as you can see from the map on the right, there were multiple entry points into York County coming from the south and a number of exit points as well. The key was to get people across the Susquehanna River. So that sets up the history of York. We've got people coming from the south into York County to find freedom. We also have York County's political background on top of that. Folks from the South, Maryland, and folks from Southern York County were, again, intertwined by marriage, by family, by politics. This is the 1860 election here in York County. Using a modern convention that did not exist in the Civil War, I'm using blue for Democrat, red for Republican, of course. And if you look at how York County voted, it's almost cultural. Southern York County, tied to Maryland, voted almost exclusively Southern Democrat. For example, Manheim Township, down in southwestern York County, 174 votes for the Democrat. Where's Al? Al, raise 2 fingers in the air. 2 votes for Abraham Lincoln. 174 for the Democrat, 2 for the Republican. Just to show you again how tied Southern York County was. The closer you got to Harrisburg, the closer you got to River, the more Republican and the more support there was for Abraham Lincoln here in the years of this American Civil War. Now, York has a number of, as Jim mentioned, there are a number of different things that are significant about York that we may not even be aware of. One of which is the fact that one of the earliest training camps in Pennsylvania was established here in York. Have you ever been to the York Fair? Of course you have. But how many of you are aware that the York Fairgrounds throughout much of the 19th century was not off Carlisle? It was off of King and Queen Street, long before all those row houses were built in the early 1900s or so. And so this was the York Fairgrounds. The United States Army took that over very early in the Civil War and had a training camp there for soldiers from New York, as far west as my native Ohio, what's now West Virginia. These troops came to York to be trained. And the US Army actually maintained a presence at what was they called Camp Winfield Scott for most of the rest of the Civil War. Very small presence. The first year of the war, almost 6,000 different soldiers came through York. And almost to a man, they wrote back, when they wrote back about York, with positive reviews about the friendliness of York County and how wonderful it was to be stationed here compared to some of their other bases. York also played host to 14,000 other visitors in the Civil War. They came again from all over the North. This was the US Army's hospital. Now, Penn Park, it's hard to imagine today, but Penn Park at one point had 14 separate hospital wards on the grounds. In early 1862, the U.S. Army had established a training camp, an auxiliary camp on Penn Park for cavalrymen. There wasn't enough space at the fairgrounds because it was crowded with infantrymen, so they moved the cavalrymen to Penn Park. They left the buildings there, and in the summer of 1862, they used these former barracks for New York cavalrymen from the 6th New York, and they transformed them into the largest hospital south of Harrisburg, between Harrisburg and Baltimore, 1,000 beds. By the time the Civil War ends, there are 2,000 beds in York, 14,000 patients are treated here in York, and less than 200 die, making this, as far as I can tell, the safest military hospital in the United States during the Civil War. Lowest mortality rate. You got shot in the Civil War, you wanted to come to York. You didn't want to go to Philadelphia. That was the highest. Now, we got to talk about the role of ladies because early on, before this hospital was established, we got 6,000 soldiers here being trained. What if you got sick? You didn't have a York hospital, didn't exist. The one over by me off Roosevelt, by all means, didn't exist. So you had no real organized medical other than the doctors in the community. Well, the women of York responded, and they started bringing the patients from the hospital into their rooms, into their homes. They fed them, they helped them. They would write letters home for the people who were so incapacitated they could not write. They rolled bandages. They wrote letters of encouragement back to the soldiers on the home front, even strangers they didn't even know. And it was the women of York that are mentioned. No offense to us guys. It's the women of York are what the soldiers were talking about. Now, there's probably several reasons for that, but there were certainly, it was the ladies of York that made the biggest impressions. As Jim mentioned, York is unique. As far as I can tell, this is one of the very few counties in the entire North that can say we were invaded by the Confederate Army from 3 directions. The first invasion, the big one that Jim mentioned with the surrender of York, came from Confederate Major General Jubal Early, who led nearly 6,600 men from the west, from Adams County into York County. The second invasion came from the north, from Cumberland County, when a small group of Confederates in an invasion nobody ever talks about came as far south as Dover, stealing horses and supplies along the way, and before skedaddling into Cumberland County. Just when York Countyans think the coast is clear, from the south comes yet another giant dust cloud as Jeb Stuart arrives with a flower of the Confederate cavalry, more than 4,500 men. Fight a battle, in fact, in Hanover, and end up riding through western York County, exiting in Franklin Township and in Carroll Township. We mentioned the role of women. There were also a key role that African Americans played here in York County. Obviously, the Underground Railroad, even though we don't often talk about it, Underground Railroad continues into the Civil War because the Emancipation Proclamation did not free a single slave in Maryland. Not one, nor in Delaware, nor in Kentucky, nor in Missouri. The Emancipation Proclamation only freed those slaves in territories that were in open rebellion against the governor. So the South, obviously. So Maryland, slaves are still enslaved during the war, and these individuals often still escape in the chaos of the war, come into York County into the Underground Railroad. And by the time of the Civil War, it's almost exclusively African-American conductors who are working on the Underground Railroad in York County. People like William C. Goodrich, folks like Samuel Berry, Ezekiel Baptiste, etc. The African Americans of York County perform a very key labor force, of course, keeping the Army well supplied. They helped defend the bridge at Wrightsville. More than 50 African Americans, civilians without uniforms, who were enrolled in a home guard militia unit, fight at Wrightsville, and one becomes the first African American ever killed in combat in York County, as far as we can tell. And finally, starting in 1864, or actually late 1863, but mostly in 1864, a number of young men and older men in York County sign up for the United States Colored Troops. Battle of Hanover, I briefly mentioned, it was the largest military engagement in York County history. It is the second, or actually third largest battle in Pennsylvania history. 9,000 combatants, 300 casualties in a small town that was barely 1,000 people at the time of the Civil War to begin with, and now they got to cope with 300 people or so being injured in their community. And again, in the spirit of York County's willingness to put service above self, way back when, long before they were Rotarians, the folks of Hanover responded by again opening their doors. President Lincoln came to York County 3 times, twice in a 2-day period, November 18th and 19th, when he traveled through Hanover Junction, Glen Rock, places like that, and on west over to Gettysburg to deliver the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln's longest journey in York County, he wasn't here to see it. His body was in the funeral train that passed through York County on a dismally, dreadfully, wickedly dreary, rainy April 21st, 1865, when his funeral train is en route from Baltimore to Harrisburg. And so finally, I'm going to talk about the high cost of war in York County. The Civil War remains, as was mentioned earlier, the bloodiest war in American history, with more than 700,000 Americans, North or South, Union or Confederate, dying in the Civil War. York County responded well. We had more than 5,000 men served from this county. More than 600 men died. One of the ones that I just want to point out here is Lieutenant John Spangler. An interesting story. He's one of the first officers, one of the first 5 officers to die at the Battle of Monocacy. He's an attorney, Fred. He's one of your many predecessors here in the county. He's killed at the Battle of Monocacy near Frederick, Maryland in July 1864. That's his photograph next to his headstone that my friend Anne Marie Ehlers put. So I'll turn it back to Jim. This has been a sweeping overview of what we consider to be the 10 most significant events or separate things that occurred in York County. And now Jim's going to talk about why does it matter today?
Yeah, that's you can see not only does Scott have a photographic memory, he's a great speaker. That's why I just am here at the beginning and end. So this will be short, but I'll just say that I'll just kind of repeat that in the 20th century we didn't really talk about the Civil War, and really haven't talked about for the last 25 years. I think the impact today of that is that when you talk about the Civil War, you inevitably talk about race and to some degree class. I mean, those are kind of, the Civil War is kind of a lever to talk about those types of things. And so I think that that was part of our issue. We had this surrender that we had to deal with that we weren't particularly proud of, but we had these other great events that we were proud of. And so we kind of put that aside, and and so now we're catching up, and Scott Mingus and his books and so on are helping spread literacy about the Civil War. And yes, and I think we're having a richer conversation about race and class in York County than maybe the richest conversation we've ever had. I just want to point out in closing that this flag, this is the flag being taken down at the time of the surrender. The Confederates came in, took down the flag. It was in Center Square, right in the middle of Continental Square, as we call it today. It's called Center Square then. And keep in mind, you might know this, at the Colonial Courthouse, where the Articles of Confederation were adopted, was at that exact same spot, right in the middle of the square. So think about that. In 1777, we have the Articles of Confederation, a confederation of 13 separate nations called states now. They came together in this document. They were later ratified, but here we had a confederation took place right in the middle of that square. What's happening here? The nation's coming apart. We're seeing it right before our eyes. We knew what happened in 1777. In 1863, the Confederates, a foreign nation, were taking down the American flag in the middle of our square. And we knew that. We wept. Many people in town wept. And so I think that in York County, we understand Confederation. We are the site of the nation's first constitution, Articles of Confederation. We also understand deconfederation. We saw it right here. And maybe there's a chance because of this understanding that we can confederate as a community. And there's a good news peg or a good peg for that confederation that maybe Rotary is even already working towards. And that is in 2026 is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the adoption. And also the next year in 2027 is the 250th of the Articles of Confederation being adopted here in New York. A chance again, kind of a peg or a hook to bring the community together again into a confederation. So we'll just stop here. And I think if there's time for questions, glad to take them. Of course, Scott will take most of them. I'll just kind of.
Yes.
Repeat.
Yeah, to repeat the comment for those who may be outside in cyber world, she was on one of my tours that I frequently used to give here in York County of Civil War topics. And I mentioned in one of the tours that the people of Hanover after the battle were very, very strong and very quick to treat the wounded. But during the battle, some York Countyans, particularly ladies, used guns to shoot out their from their windows to fire at the Confederate cavalrymen that were riding around on Frederick Street. So York County has not necessarily always been quite so welcoming to people. In that particular case, not at all. But it's one of the few cases I can actually find in this entire Civil War that Northern ladies grabbed their guns and in fact went to war themselves. And it happened right here in Hanover during the Battle of Hanover. So thanks for bringing that one up. It's one of the great little human interest stories here in town. Yeah, Frank.
Where can we acquire your book locally?
Good question. I mean, obviously the gift shop of the York County History. The question was, where can people buy our books here locally? The gift shop of the York County History Center is the place we certainly would recommend. They probably carry the most of what Jim and I together have written. You can also get them in places like TG Books or at the York Emporium. Most of the leading bookstores in the region, the gift shop at Historic Wrightsville, et cetera, have most of our books. Thanks, Frank. Yes. Oh, great question. You want to take it, Jim, or me too?
Yeah. Yeah, the Confederates were here for, oh yeah, did the delay affect the Battle of Gettysburg at all? That's really good. I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but I think not, because they were here for 43 hours from Saturday through through Tuesday morning early, altogether about 43 hours. And they were called back and to countermarch because they were converging in Gettysburg. So they countermarched all the way to Heidelberg in Adams County, and then they went down into Gettysburg, and they got into fighting on the first day. So maybe if they weren't in York, they would have been there sooner, a little sooner. Maybe that would have, you can always use those what ifs, but they got there in time to get into the thick of the fight on the first day at the Battle of Gettysburg. Other questions?
We do have a question from our virtual audience, and you touched on this briefly, and that was the ransom that the city had paid, and there was a discrepancy between the six-figure amount requested and the amount that was paid. Could you elaborate on that? And also, did the general who demanded that, did he come back after the war to collect?
Yeah, I'll take that. Loaded question, Ann. Yeah, I mean, Major General Jubal Early was in the habit of ransoming the towns that the Confederate armies came into. So York was not unique. It was something that Early throughout his career, General Early, was doing. While here in York, he asked for $100,000. York City Council, as well as other members of the community, 2 representatives from each of York's wards, went door to door to collect money from the citizens to support the Confederate war effort in response to this ransom, which people thought, if we don't do it, maybe he's going to burn our town down. or do something really nasty here in the area. Collects $28,610, as Jim mentioned earlier. Jim Worley never comes back to York, Pennsylvania, but he sure talked about us a lot the rest of his life. In fact, on multiple occasions that I can document, including in a letter written to George Pearl, a York County historian, but it happened multiple other times enough that I believe it to be 100% accurate. Joe Worley wrote, and I quote from one of the newspapers in Richmond, "Back during the war, I visited your fair city," addressed to York, Pennsylvania. "I asked for $100,000. You only gave me $28,000. I want the rest of my money, or I'm turning your fair city into a collection agency." Signed J.A. Early Esquire, attorney at law, Lynchburg, Virginia. So yeah, the general never came back, but his mind was always on the $72,000 York never paid him.
I'll just add to that. They kind of assigned people to go around and to every home and collect money. And you can see how much everybody gave to kind of get rid of the Confederates. So if you have a family that was in New York in the 1860s, you can go back and at the History Center and actually see what they paid, if they paid, you know. So I think people like to know that type of stuff. You know, to my great-great-grandfather, how culpable was he, you know, and so on.
Yeah, and to Jim's point, it was a bipartisan committee that rounded up the money with bipartisan donorship. In fact, one of the largest donors, the Confederate cause, was Republican attorney James Latimer, who gave $100 and then realized, as he later wrote, "I sheepishly, like a fool, gave the money," because people were bowing into peer pressure and they were bowing into the emotions of the moment without necessarily thinking what they were doing. So it was not just the Democrats or just the Republicans. We all contributed.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Al?
I would make the assumption that any collection at all was successful because of the fear that was rampant as the Confederate Army came north. But other than Sharpsburg, this was really the first scale incursion into the north. And there was no history of, like Chambersburg, of burning the city or anything like that. What caused the panic?
Well, I'll go and start here. Keep in mind that Chambersburg came the next year. Okay, yeah, there's no, there's nothing to suggest that they would burn the town. And that's part of the problem, is that we went out and met them without anything except the fact that we were concerned for our town or concerned for our businesses in our town. And I think that ties back into our political view, because our political view was not abolitionist or Republican, and we weren't pro-Lincoln. We already looked at that. So we weren't really solidly against those invaders coming up here. We're kind of in the middle, you know, and so we didn't have, I think we didn't have the resolve to stand up to them. Interestingly, in Hanover, which voted Republican, voted Lincoln in 1860, they stood up. In other words, what they did, and you might be wondering, what could have they done really? They were outnumbered, and what could they really done? And what they could have done is done what they did in Hanover, and the town's fathers just kind of stood there and said, they didn't go out and meet the invading force that came in there. Just kind of stood there, said, you know, talked with them, and that they really kind of acquiesced. And Hanover, to this day, they had a battle there, but Hanover to this day doesn't have that sore spot about surrendering, because they didn't.
Yeah, one other thing I mentioned, because you brought up another key point, and that's the fact that there's so many people will tell you Gettysburg was the first invasion of Pennsylvania. Wasn't. Jeb Stuart invaded Chambersburg, Franklin County, in October 1862, burned every single railroad facility in Chambersburg to the ground 2 years before the town gets burned down by John McCausland. And because that knowledge is very fresh in the minds of people here in York, because refugees from Chambersburg in October of 1862 streamed east to the river to get away from Jeb Stuart. Everybody in York was well aware that the Confederates came into a town. When the ransom wasn't paid, Jeb Stuart destroyed the railroad, which was in Chambersburg, that was their #1 industry back in 1862. So that's fresh in people's minds that if we don't comply, the Fate of Chambersburg. This is the 1862 Fate of Chambersburg. Nobody could imagine in 1864 would get much worse when they were ransomed for $500,000 in cash in 1864, or $100,000 in gold, or else the Confederates were going to burn their town down. It wasn't $500,000 in cash in all of Franklin County, let alone in Chambersburg. So Chambersburg, of course, was torched. But keep that in mind. This was not the first invasion by any stretch. Yeah.
Was it at all helpful that A.B. Farquhar and some other York businessmen met with Early and did visits in the South that might have given them an edge?
So that's a loaded question about there was a York businessman, a young Quaker. Oh yeah, I'm working on it. By the name of A.B. Farquhar, who was the instigator of the surrender. So the question was, did his role, if you will, help instigate this? The fact that Farquhar was a businessman doing business in the South before the war. It affects your question. Jim, you want to tackle that one? Great question.
Yeah, there was obviously a business motivation to do it, and there was a political motivation to surrender. Everything. It's hard to say exactly what motivations are but those were among them. The motivations, no question about that. The one thing we do know, if York would have been consider the Battle of the Bulge, whenever they were asked, the general there, General McAuliffe was asked to when he was surrounded, Battle of the Bulge in World War II, he's asked to surrender. What did he say? He said, nuts, and he's not going to surrender. And so if we would have done anything except, even if we would have stood there in the square and surrendered, it would have been different, but we sought him out. And I think that's what caused a lot of the derision that immediately happened. And that's why George Sheets, I'll just say this quickly, George Sheets, the historian, in writing his 1982 book, To the Setting of the Sun, said he had pressure when he wrote that book not to write about the surrender. He did anyway. He also was pressured not to write about Goodrich and one other item, but he was pressured not to, the York race riots. And he did all three. So that's kind of the climate of the time up until the recent years. I got to say, I never received pressure like that in my writing, and Scott can speak for himself. But it was a big event. The surrender was a big event, and it's good to talk about it, and that's why we're here today talking about it.
Thank you, Scott and Jim. I think our club could listen to you talk about it for the rest of the day. You're both excellent speakers, both of you, and we really appreciate the expertise and effort and passion you put into curating our community's history. So thank you very much. And just a note, a message came in on the chat from our friend Joan, and she said that the History Center has a silver tea set, that we were preservationists of our community and others were preservation of their silver. So it was buried to prevent the Confederates from getting that. So you can see that at the History Center. Thank you again, Jim and Scott. So you mentioned, Jim and Scott, fascinating. I didn't know that about the pistol packing mamas in Hanover. Very proud of them. So we have a book that we donate in honor of our speakers each week. And this one will be donated in Hanover to the YWCA Childcare. So we have a nameplate over there, a Rotary nameplate. We'll ask you gentlemen to sign that, and we'll get that to the Sweet Cherubs in Hanover. And I'd like to announce our club meeting next week will feature another excellent speaker, Stephen Martinez, Executive Director of the SPCA in York. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Take care. It's going to be warm, 90 degrees. So lots of ice cream and cold tall drinks this weekend. And hope you enjoy our closing song for those virtually. It is Landslide by Fleetwood Mac. Take care.